Thank you everyone for being here and having us today. I actually will start the presentation in the previous slide with a question to the audience here. How many of you yesterday did you try the crickets that were among the foods offered in the buffet? Can you please raise your hands? Quite some in the audience. And how many of you would you try a burger that contains biomass derived from animal cells, cultural animal cells? Quite an adventure audience. So if you are going to consume these two, the novel foods, those two are examples of novel foods, it's completely your choice in the European Union. However, what is the duty of the European Food Safety Authority is to make sure that these foods are safe before being placed on the market. So today, we're going to discuss together how the updated novel food guidance, with a focus on emerging novel protein sources, can protect consumers' health in the European Union and also, at the same time, support innovation in the agri-food system. So in the previous days, like yesterday and today, we have heard of many reasons why these novel, new, alternative protein sources are of importance to shape resilient, healthier, and diversified food systems. And there are many reasons why these are important. Like nowadays, we have new technologies that enable us to do further, more innovative products. Also, these new technologies, they enable us to rethink how we use our food sources in a different manner compared to what we have done in the past. Also, many of these protein sources, they hold promises for environmental sustainability. And some of them, also, they consider ethics and animal welfare. Also, the interest has been shifted to these new dietary sources in an effort to build healthier diets and also to investigate different nutrient profiles. So, in the European Union, as it was mentioned before by my colleague from the Commission, Rafael Perez, there is a food safety assessment that contains three main pillars: the risk assessment, the risk communication, and the risk management. Today, of course, we are going to focus on the risk assessment and more specifically what EFSA does in the remit of risk assessment. So very briefly, the European Food Safety Authority was established back in 2002 as a part of a project that aimed to improve the EU food safety system, to help ensure a high level of consumer protection, of course, to restore and maintain confidence in the EU food supply after a series of different crises in the food sector. And also, this project aimed to clearly separate the risk assessment and risk management functions in the EU. So, we heard before what means novel food in the European Union. We have a date cutoff paired with significant consumption, and also, at the same time, these products must fall in at least one of those categories that you can see on the screen. You can think that novel proteins can belong to some of those categories, as we heard in the previous presentation. And from this slide, you can understand that novel foods and also novel protein sources and products thereof can be very heterogeneous. They can be very different. And this is a summary of what we had before, the flow chart of having a novel food authorization in the European Union. We must remember that to have a new novel food authorized, we must have a novel food application dossier that has to be submitted by the industry to the Commission. And then following the procedure that you can see on the screens, after the dossier is validated and is received by EFSA, we conduct the risk assessment, of course, within specific legal time frameworks. And then it's up to the risk managers to decide if and how these products will be authorized in the EU market. So to clarify what EFSA does, which are our missions and responsibilities in the novel food area, we don't develop food safety policies and legislation, we don't adopt regulations, we don't authorize marketing of new products, and we do not define the labeling of these products. Also, EFSA is not responsible for enforcing food safety legislation. What we do in the area of novel foods is to provide independent scientific advice and support for the EU risk managers and policymakers regarding the safety of these products. We are also responsible to develop and provide up-to-date guidance in the field, also to communicate independently and timely all the findings associated with the risk assessment of these products, and where feasible, we also promote collaboration. Now we will focus on the guidance as we have developed recently in the field. Last year, we received from the European Commission an update request regarding our guidance documents in the novel food area. And after having preparing with the EFSA Novel Food Working Group and the NDA panel and the colleagues in the Nutrition and Food Innovation Unit, we put the draft guidance for public consultation. This means that it was open for comments to all the public, to all the interested parties. Then the panel assessed the comments. Of course, we made some updates that reflect some of these relevant comments. And the new guidance was adopted by the panel in June 2024 and is publicly available since September 2024. The reason behind this request for the update were that there were some regulatory updates in the field of novel foods that should be reflected in the guidance. There are, of course, advances in food science and technology in the field, and also what was considered was that EFSA had gained experience in assessing novel foods. And when I say experience, I mean there are different factors. Since 2018, due to the change of the regulation, there is a centralized assessment of all the novel food dossier, all the multiple and heterogeneous products, done only by EFSA. And of course, there are new EFSA cross-cutting guidance applicable on novel foods. There are risk assessment methodological advances in the field, and also at EFSA we have, in the meantime, developed new tools that could help in the risk assessment of these products. And also, from continuous engagement with our stakeholders, we have received feedback that would be relevant for the guidance. For example, last year in Brussels, we had a scientific colloquium on cell culture-derived foods and food ingredients. And actually, you can find the report online with the outcomes from this event. So we had to capture all these different experience in the new guidance document. We must remember that there are three fundamental principles for the novel food risk assessment. The novel food must be safe under the proposed conditions of use. It cannot be nutritionally disadvantageous. And we must remember that in the novel food regulatory framework, we do not assess the efficacy, any benefit of novel foods. Here are the contents of the updated EFSA Novel Food Scientific Guidance. You can see different areas, and all these areas reflect the body of evidence that we need to assess during the risk assessment. We request information on the identity of the novel foods, on how these products are produced, on the composition of these products, the specifications, information of possible history of use of the novel food or its source elsewhere in the world, information on how these foods and food ingredients are going to be used and how much of this. Also, we assess information on absorption, distribution, metabolism and excretion, toxicological and nutrition information, and last but not least, information regarding potential allergenicity. We must remember that this is scientific guidance. In parallel, we have also published an administrative guidance for the preparation of novel food applications, which actually helps applicants with more practical information, like how to use the system, how to prepare from a practical point of view the dossiers. So, going now to the identity of the novel foods, with focus, of course, on the new novel protein sources, you can see on the screen, we have expanded and explained further the following aspects. What is a novel food? When non-novel ingredients can be considered as integral part of the novel food, and also how applicants should propose names that reflect more accurately what are their products. And you can, recalling the previous slide with different categories, you can understand that there are different subsections regarding the identity of the novel food, and some example is like specific identity requirements regarding foods consisting of isolated from or produced from animals or their parts, specific identity requirements regarding those produced with microorganisms or foods derived from cell or tissue culture. Regarding the production process, we must remember that this is a very important section of the dossier because actually we use the information there to do the first step of the risk assessment, the hazard identification. There are different subsections talking about general provisions, like we request information on the input material, on the yield, on novel aspects of the process, on quality and safety assurance information, and also criteria regarding standardization of these products. We have then the subsection about considerations for specific production process steps, how the applicant should describe some conditions regarding, for example, farming, culturing, the use of biological agents, post-harvest handling procedures. We have also consideration for specific novel food categories, some things that applicants should consider by thinking what is the source of the novel food. And also we have some additional considerations, like what happens in cases where the novel food application dossier is sent not by one company, but by a consortium of producers. What happens if the producer changes something in the production process while the risk assessment is ongoing? So all this information is included in the updated guidance. And we must remember that regarding novel protein sources thereof, we can have various production processes that can lead to various forms. So some examples here, we can have whole foods, we can have protein concentrates, protein isolates, and protein hydrolysates. And also, it should be highlighted that the novel status could be attributed, not by EFSA, but by the risk managers to a product due to novel processing aspects, due to the novelty of the source, but in some cases due to the combination of the above. For example, in the past, we assessed a UV-treated novel process, a powder coming from yellow mealworm, a novel source. Regarding compositional data, we have explained further the role of this data in the risk assessment. I could say that compositional data is the backbone both of the application dossier, but also of the risk assessment, because they can shape the requirements, the scientific requirements in other areas. We have tried to provide guidance about general requirements, what the applicants should consider when selecting analytical methods to analyze their products, how they can address compositional variability among the different batches of their products, information on sampling practices, and also information on compositional analytes. What exactly should they analyze in the product? How to use information in the literature, how to use information from the production process to decide what is relevant to be analyzed. Because, of course, you can understand that doing compositional analysis can include many things, but not always everything is relevant. Also, there are specific requirements regarding single substances, single mixtures, complex mixture, and whole foods. And a very important aspect is the stability, both of the novel food itself, but also we ask the applicants to investigate what is the impact when you are using the novel food as an ingredient to produce other foods. Does, for example, additional heating, high temperatures change something? Does the presence of the novel food in other foods induce the formation of other process contaminants? So these are things that the applicants should consider and monitor in their product. Regarding protein-specific requirements, we have expanded the information on protein quantification, especially, with novel protein sources. The traditional ways to calculate the protein content and the conversion factors do not necessarily describe accurately the quantitative content of protein in the foods. So there are also information when additional calculation more specific are requested for depending on the novel food identity. Also, we request the characterization of the amino acid profile of these products, and also some considerations where further protein characterization is needed, like with foods with specific or enriched in proteins or peptides. Then they have to provide details on individual protein peptide profiles. And also, with regards to compositional analysis, we must remember that in some cases, additional analysis with regards to composition may be needed, considering allergenicity aspects. Regarding the history of use of the novel food or its source, we need to have information on how this product or its source is used elsewhere in the world. Also, in cases that is used, for example, as a medicinal product, what is the extent of use, who exactly consume it, and when. And also, if there is any information regarding handling and preparation methods. Now, regarding the proposed uses, use levels, and anticipated intake of the novel food, there are different subsections. We talk about the target population, and actually here is one change that came due to regulatory updates in the field. In the past, novel food applicants could, for example, produce a protein hydrolysate, put it as an ingredient in yogurts, and say, these yogurts are addressed only to adults, so we examine the safety only for adult population. However, the risk managers in the EU considered that this should not be the case. So the target population now, by law, is the general population when no labeling restrictions can be applied. So it means that in such cases, the safety must be proven for all the population groups. Also, we have specific requirements for food ingredients, whole foods, food supplements, and also particular food categories. You can see on the screen Dietex tool and FAME tool. Dietex tool is a new tool developed by EFSA. It's a data exposure tool, and this tool enables both risk assessors but also applicants to calculate in advance the anticipated daily intake of the novel food, based, of course, on the proposed use and use levels. And there are considerations regarding combined intake when considering other sources of the novel food or its main constituents. And also, there is guidance regarding the estimated exposure to substances of possible concern. On this slide, there are information on admin toxicity testing strategy. You can see it's a tiered approach. 3 different tiers. Tier 1 is the basic tier, and 3 different, let's say, sections: admins and toxicity and repeated dose toxicity. In theory, the applicants have to at least provide the information that is listed in Tier 1, but of course, in case that they can provide scientific arguments on why something is not needed from Tier 1, then they can provide these arguments, and then it's up to EFSA to decide during the assessment if they agree or not with the arguments of the applicant. I'm not going to go through the details of this tiered approach, but I would like to highlight that findings from one tier can trigger testing in the next year, and also there are triggers that are intersectional. For example, findings in the ADME area can trigger additional testing requirements in genotoxicity, or, for example, in the repeated dose toxicity area. Now, moving to the nutritional information section, we must remember that the novel foods must not be nutrition disadvantageous. So in the new guidance, we have explained further what is this concept. So we provide guidance regarding investigating the excess intake of nutrients through the novel food or the inadequate intake of essential nutrients, also referring to the anti-nutrient content, for example, cases where novel foods could replace something in the diet. Also, there are specific considerations for novel foods that are proposed as new sources of micronutrients. And actually, in parallel with the novel food guidance, we issued an updated guidance on scientific principles and data requirements for the safety and relative bioavailability assessment of new micronutrient sources. There are also specific considerations for novel protein sources, which we're going to see in a while, and also some additional overarching information in the field of nutrition. In the next slide, you can see how the applicants can investigate the nutritional impact of the novel food. In this flowchart, there are considerations that apply to all novel foods and considerations that apply to novel foods that intend to replace other foods in the diet. The goal is that there are no safety concerns regarding the nutritional impact of the novel food. The applicants, of course, using this flowchart and applying the detailed considerations, in case that they reach the result that the consumption of the novel food could be nutrition disadvantageous, they can, even before submitting the application, they can, for example, modify the novel food composition by changing, for example, the production process, or they can modify the conditions of use in order to mitigate this aspect. And we had examples in the past, for example, that the consumption of a novel food could lead to an excess intake of some micronutrients, and for these novel foods, the outcome was a negative one. Here you can see some information on protein quality. There are specific considerations regarding protein sources when an applicant should examine the protein quality of a novel food, and when there are like two main points: when the novel food provides more than 15% of population-specific average protein requirement, and when the novel food can serve as the main protein source, for example, in case of single meal replacement or special medical foods. Regarding how to do this, we outline the guidance that the digestible indispensable amino acid score should be investigated according to the new guidelines published a few months ago by FAO and EIA in 2024. And actually, they should combine information on the true digestibility of indispensable amino acids with 8 specific reference patterns. And also they should consider what is the composition of indispensable amino acids in the novel food, the antinutrient content, the impact of processing, but also the batch variability when doing the studies. And also considering the fact that in vitro methods are being developed, but still not really validated, we have provided also some minimum requirements regarding in vitro methods in cases that the applicant considered to send us something that has been conducted in vitro. Last slide of the scientific risk assessment of the guidance section is the allergenicity, very relevant, as we heard from previous speakers, for novel proteins and protein sources. Actually, allergenicity was one of the most revamped sections of the guidance, and what is offered now is a tiered testing approach that considers the production process of the novel food, the source of the novel food, provides tailored dietary requirements according to the different categories, also provides information regarding clinically relevant allergenic proteins, considers protein stability, and also covers cases in which the allergenic potential is unknown. So depending on how the product is produced and in which novel food category it belongs, as you see on the table, the requirements change. And this was done in order, first of all, to help applicants navigate through meaningful testing and also help them avoid conducting unnecessary tests. So to wrap up the presentation, we saw that the EFSA Novel Food Scientific Guidance provides advice for applicants on preparing their novel food application dossiers, and of course maintaining the flexibility to tailor these requirements to specific products. The update highlights reflects recent regulatory changes in the field, advances in food science, and also EFSA's experience in risk assessment of novel foods. Novel proteins and products and sources thereof have been considered in this guidance in terms of their diversity, because you can understand we can have many different protein-containing products. And it should be highlighted that the backbone of the risk assessment is the compositional profile of the novel food, including nutrient profile, microbiological aspects, contaminants, and substance of concern, because based on what is identified there, maybe additional testing or additional analysis could be required. And the impact of this guidance and the safety assessment that EFSA conducts in the field of novel foods in general is that supports the food chain resilience, diversity, and safety by providing scientific-based advice for potential EU market approvals. And also the requirements of the novel food guidance should be considered having in mind the concept that we heard earlier, the safe by design. This means that if when you are producing, you are designing a new product, you can align your innovation with what is required in this guidance to assess the safety. If you integrate early in the product development safety aspects, this could simplify and in some cases speed up the pre-market authorization, because by considering these aspects, an applicant can know even better their product. So at this point, I would like to close the presentation with a call for interest that is open. So if you are stakeholders interested in what we do in the area of food and feed products, including, of course, novel foods, you could apply to be part of the stakeholder new community on applications, and then you would have the chance to discuss, to propose topics, to propose issues, how EFSA could interact better with applicants and help them during the production process. Next year is the deadline, 10th of January 2025. And regardless if you are a stakeholder or not, you can still stay connected to EFSA through various channels to retrieve the information you need, because the information is put there in public by EFSA, but of course you must spend some time and use all the channels to retrieve this information available publicly. So now I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would be happy to reply to any questions you may have. Thank you.